Good afternoon, all. And we are going to get this kicked off right on time today because I know all of you, my fellow Bics, have a lot of bicking to do around the offices. So with that, I want to introduce myself again. I am Maren Brisson-Huster, your current 2020 NC Realtors president. For those of you who do not know me, I hail from Charlotte market, and that is where I'm currently sitting right now in my office. Unfortunately, we are not all together doing these meetings, which hopefully at some point we will be. We are recording today's session, so it will be made available on the NC Realtors website. Please note, we will send out an email with it if you were registered for this session, so you can forward it on to any of your coworkers who you think may be interested in this information today. If you experience any technical difficulties whatsoever, go check out the chat. There is the contact information for, here it goes, I just saw it, for the tech hotline. It just popped up. Give them a shout if you have any tech problems. Total plug, but give them a shout if you have any tech problems. It's fantastic, and they actually fixed my son's Xbox, which, let me tell you, saved me some heartache. With that, I'm excited to share our third offering in a new series of monthly webinars geared directly towards you guys, our brokers in charge, called Big Talks. We spent a lot of time over the last few years having conversations with those of you in our BIC community all across the state, discussing tools, resources, and information you need from us to help you do your job and serve everyone you serve. After reviewing all the feedback and conversations, it was clear to us that we needed to create a place, a forum for information, for legal issues, risk management, diversity, business opportunities, and you name it, pretty much every other important topic out there to help you manage your teams while also giving you the opportunity to engage, ask the questions that are coming to your mind, and walk away with new knowledge that you can implement. We hope you enjoyed this new gathering place. 2020 has really brought us into the world of the virtual, right? And so this is one place out of many that your targeted voice is heard, communicated to, and with. And so with that, I'm really, really excited to have Christopher Chung, the CEO of the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, here today to discuss the impacts of COVID-19, what it's had on our economic development efforts across the state and continuing, and what we are going to see in the future. He's one of my favorites. I love hearing him speak. You all know I'm a squint, so I love everything he throws at us. And with that, I'm going to turn it on over to you, Christopher. Thanks for being here today.
Great, thank you so much. Sorry, my phone is going off and I'm tethered to my computer. So if I try to get too far away, it'll yank the whole computer setup. So my apologies. It'll finish ringing here in a second. But thank you so much, Maren. Appreciate being with everyone today. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a presentation that I have prepared. That'll just give me a couple of visual cues to remind me of some things to talk about. But appreciate you all having me with you today. I'm sure all of you, of course, are leaders in your respective organizations and offices, and I'm sure it's been an interesting past 7.5, 8 months for all of you. But thank you for everything that you all are doing. Thank you, of course, to the North Carolina Realtors for the partnership and support that our organization enjoys with you all. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen here. You should hopefully see what looks like a presentation. And what I'm going to do today is use about 30 minutes here and just leave the rest of the 30 minutes or so that we have just for Q&A that you all may have. But talk a little bit about what we've seen on the economic development front in North Carolina. We're responsible for a number of different things that make up economic development in this state. I'm not going to have time to talk about all of those. Certainly could under a longer format, but I'm really going to try to hit some of the highlights across some of the functions that we are best known for. Tell you a little bit about what we're doing in response to those things that we've observed since March, and even get into a little bit about perhaps prognosticating a few trends that we are starting to see take shape across some of the different areas where we're active. In terms of the Economic Development Partnership in North Carolina, hopefully it's not a new organization for many of you, but for those of you that you've not had a chance to hear about the EDPNC, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is pretty straightforward. We get up every day, all 60 some odd of us who work for this organization. We get up every day with the mission of helping to improve the economic well-being and quality of life for the people who call North Carolina home. There's 10.5 million people living in this state today. So whether you've been born, raised, and lived your entire life in North Carolina, or whether you're someone like me who moved here a number of years ago, those are the folks, those 10.5 million people, that's who we go to work for the benefit of. How we do that, though, is really how we like to describe the different parts of our economic development mission. Most of the attention we get as an organization, if you read anything about us in the media, it's usually around our work in business recruitment. And business recruitment is very straightforward. Those are our efforts to attract companies in from outside the state. Headquarters, manufacturing, food processing, biotechnology, software development. There's a lot of different companies and industries that we interact with on a routine basis in the context of trying to get them to locate here. Now, maybe they're planning a new expansion and they're trying to decide what state they put that in. Maybe they're even relocating from where they are today because for whatever reason, their current home just doesn't work as well for their business. Those are the types of opportunities that our business recruitment team is working on any given day. And it gets a lot of attention because when we have success in that pursuit, that's a lot of headlines, it's a groundbreaking, it's a ribbon cutting, it's lots of visibility for something that's very important to the economy of North Carolina. But it is not the only way that economic development gets done. We also have a team that's focused on supporting the growth needs of existing employers across the state, primarily in the manufacturing and industrial sectors. That's where our toolbox of services best fits. But we're out there on a regular basis dealing with companies all across North Carolina who are already here today, trying to understand what issues may be preventing them from continuing to grow and add jobs here in our state. As important as it is for us to recruit new employers to North Carolina, we never want to forget about the hundreds of thousands of companies that already call North Carolina home. We don't have to persuade them that North Carolina is a great place to do business. We don't have to wine and dine them per se. They already know North Carolina is great. It's why they're here. It's why they got their start here. But there may be some issues that they're running into right now that we can try to help them resolve, and that's going to help them continue to expand, invest, and add jobs right here. A couple other functions that often don't get as much attention as they deserve. Our international trade team is constantly working with North Carolina manufacturers, small and medium size, to help those manufacturers tap into new growth markets overseas. So whether companies are looking to export more to Canada and Mexico or to far-flung regions like Asia and the Middle East and Europe, our team is there to help those companies successfully sell into new markets and develop new overseas customers, because when they're successful doing that, those companies are going to likely grow here in North Carolina to meet that increased demand. We also have a team that's focused on small business startup counseling, really counseling would-be entrepreneurs on those first couple of steps of standing up and starting a brand new business entity in North Carolina. Last but not least, as you'll hear me talk about, tourism promotion. Tourism is big business in North Carolina. It's accountable for tens of billions of dollars of our state's economy. Our focus is on promoting North Carolina as a leisure travel destination, trying to get people to visit here from around the United States, but also from around the world, spending their time and spending their money here in North Carolina in a way that supports our leisure, hospitality, and tourism economy. And like I said, I'll touch on that a little bit later on during our presentation. But that's our mission, and that's how our mission looks in practice as we go out there every day to do economic development on behalf of North Carolina. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so we are not a state agency. A lot of people sometimes think that's the case. What actually happened, though, was everything that we do, those functions of business recruitment, tourism promotion, et cetera, those used to be within a state government agency, the North Carolina Department of Commerce. 6 years ago, those functions were spun out of state government. Our nonprofit was created to take those functions over, and today we perform those functions under contract with the state government of North Carolina, specifically the Department of Commerce. We have a 17-member board of directors that is drawn from all different industry sectors and from all different corners of North Carolina. We are a statewide organization after all. Again, these are primarily business leaders who provide that governance and strategic leadership for our organization. The Secretary of Commerce, of course, is also one of those members of our board. In the real estate industry, probably one of the better known names on our board would be John Kane. Those of you who live here in the Raleigh area, you know he's, to say the least, he's pretty big into the real estate development scene in the Triangle market. We're very fortunate. We count, including the North Carolina Association of Realtors, we count more than 70 private sector firms and organizations who invest in our organization, anywhere from $5,000 a year to $100,000 a year. Those give us additional private sector resources that we can put towards our mission. Most of our funding comes from that contract we have with the public sector, but we do depend a lot on private sector investment that just augments our public funding. Again, gives us more dollars with which we can go out there and market North Carolina for business, for tourism, and for all those other services that we provide. We're about 65 employees around the state, most of us based here in the main office in downtown Raleigh, but we have a number of folks out in the field who focus on our existing employer support. And then that's augmented by about a dozen contractors around the world, offices that are focused on either attracting foreign companies here to North Carolina, helping North Carolina exporters sell into overseas countries, or even promoting North Carolina to international tourists who may be looking to visit the United States. And of course, we want them to come visit North Carolina. So that's a little about the organization in case you don't know us. I'm going to dive now into some of the observations that we've seen in our work over the past 7.5 months. And again, I'm not going to touch on all 5 facets of what we do. I'm really going to focus on existing industry, our tourism efforts, and then of course, business recruitment, and try to spend a little bit of time on each one of those. What have we seen? What are we doing about it? And what do we think is ahead as we continue our work in those respective areas? Existing industry. So as I said, business recruitment gets a ton of attention because it generates a lot of headlines when we successfully, when a company announces that they're locating a new operation. It takes an entire team of partners, including us, and hopefully we get that kind of business recruitment result. And as I said, it gets a lot of attention, but that by no means means it's the most important aspect of economic development. If anything, it's actually more important for us to take care of the companies that are here today. There are far more existing employers around North Carolina today than the number of employers we could ever hope to recruit here from the outside. Just by sheer numbers, we want to make sure we continue to listen to what our existing employers need and to take care of those existing companies so that they can continue growing organically here in our state. You go back to the earliest days of the pandemic in March, one of the first things out of the gate, as soon as it all dawned on us how big of a deal COVID-19 would be, one of the things that our existing industry team really had to spend time on was helping a lot of our companies, our existing employers, navigate that whole essential versus non-essential status. I'm not sure how the real estate world had to deal with essential versus non-essential, but you can imagine for a lot of our manufacturing firms in North Carolina, maintaining that continuity of operations. Again, manufacturing is not something that can be done virtually. You've got to have your workforce be able to leave home and go to the workplace to produce that product. And there was, for a while there, uncertainty around, would it be a federal definition, a state definition, a local definition of what's essential versus non-essential, because this ultimately boiled down to business continuity for a lot of the companies that we regularly support. So that was one of those things that took up a lot of our time in the opening weeks of the pandemic. We, of course, unfortunately saw a lot of employers that either due to soft demand or just due to some other challenge brought about by COVID, began laying off people, furloughing employees, in some cases, unfortunately, even closing down operations. Now, was it all 100% because of COVID and the uncertainty there, or did COVID simply accelerate something that those businesses were already dealing with that might have caused them to downsize, and it just COVID kicked it up by 100. We certainly saw that. At the same time, we also saw a lot of companies in different industry sectors needing to surge hire or expand as a result of much greater demand. You take a sector like food and beverage, or a lot of businesses that are in the biotechnology, pharmaceutical, and life sciences space. We've seen much higher demand and activity in some of these sectors. And what that's led to, at least in our corner of the world, is conversations with these companies about expanding and needing to hire skilled workers faster than they would have otherwise to meet that new demand. And so that helped offset some of the layoffs and the furloughs and closures we saw. Of course, many of you remember in the first months of the pandemic, the federal government began efforts to roll out stimulus and aid aimed at businesses to help them get through what, I don't know that everyone would have thought it would be 8 months since that time, but helping them get through the pandemic in good financial shape. We were spending a lot of our time helping companies figure out how to navigate that increasingly complex web of state, local, and federal resources aimed at helping business owners and companies navigate these uncharted waters. And frankly, there was a lot of confusion over programs. There was even some anxiety and frustration about ability to access these tools and resources. A lot of our team was focused on helping companies get through that process successfully. You fast forward to more recent days of the pandemic, and we continue to help some of the companies around North Carolina to everybody's favorite word, to pivot into manufacturing something new, in this case, personal protective equipment, as we get ready to deal with what looks like a third wave of infection. The need for gowns, masks, face shields for our first line responders and healthcare professionals is likely to surge up again. And fortunately, a number of companies here in North Carolina have already successfully made that transition into producing these products to supply that high demand. And of course, for many companies, continuing to reopen, bring more of their workforce back in a safe manner. We've even helped companies to access testing resources, to actually procure personal protective equipment for themselves and their customers, again, in a way that helps all of our companies to get back to something resembling normalcy. On the tourism front, again, all of you know back in March, leisure travel pretty much came to a halt. My family and I happened to be in the Outer Banks the week that the world got turned upside down. So it was a very strange, surreal feeling to drive off of the Outer Banks, off of the barrier island, and see that they'd set up roadblocks to prevent any non-residents from getting back on to the Outer Banks. We haven't been back since that time. They've reopened, of course, but that was just a very strange time. But leisure travel, of course, a lot of trips people ended up canceling right away, just as quickly as this pandemic came on. Business travel, many of you know that if corporations didn't restrict it in the first place, then many of the events and in-person meetings we would be traveling for work pretty much also got canceled. So leisure and business travel both ground to a pretty quick halt. What that did was it really hurt a lot of our small businesses in North Carolina that depend on the tourism industry, whether that's business tourism or leisure tourism. Many of these small businesses, think hotels, motels, restaurants, tourism attractions, pretty much saw demand drop off a cliff overnight. And as a result, coupled with, in some cases, an inability to access federal relief resources, to even know where to go to get those resources, unfortunately, that meant many of these small businesses closed their doors in those first few days of the pandemic just because of this confluence of zero demand and inability to secure a financial lifeline. We went from being the 6th most visited state in the country, which is a statistic we're always proud of because we're actually 9th in population, but we draw the 6th most visitors in part because we have these beautiful natural attractions. 6th most visited state to the 6th highest rise in unemployment claims, many of those stemming, of course, from downsizings and closures in our leisure and hospitality sectors. That'll happen, unfortunately, when you see demand pretty much drop off overnight, which is what happened back in March. Now, the state has, of course, gradually seen reopening for tourism and travel, more leisure travel than anything else. But you go back to Memorial Day weekend, and that's really when you started to see tourism creep back in a lot of parts of our state, be it the coast or the mountains. And we know that tourism will come back eventually. It's more a matter of when. But the challenge on the tourism front is, each of these communities around North Carolina, there's usually a county tourism office. And that county tourism office, maybe it's in the Outer Banks, or maybe it's down in Wilmington, or it's Asheville. Their job, of course, is to market their local destinations to get travelers coming in. Well, those could be travelers coming from somewhere else in North Carolina. They could be travelers coming from outside North Carolina, but those local tourism offices are constantly trying to market their destinations to bring tourism into their communities. The problem is that those local tourism offices, they're funded with occupancy tax revenues. These are taxes collected on hotel and motel stays. When you had a period of several months where hotel and motel demand was essentially zero, and then you've had more months after that where demand is not where it historically has been, what that means is many of these local tourism offices are doing with far less occupancy tax revenue than they would under normal times. And that very revenue is what they're supposed to use to promote themselves as a travel destination when people begin feeling more comfortable traveling again. So it is very much an insult to injury type phenomenon where the tourism industry's recovery is going to be that much more protracted because local tourism offices aren't going to have as much funding as they normally would to throw open the doors, to market themselves, to bring tourists back, to spend money in their communities. A few stats worth mentioning. We, of course, track room demand and room revenue. These are two of the best proxies that tell us what visitor spending looks like on an annual basis, and we get that data monthly. Just got the September numbers. You can see for room demand, we are 32% below where we were at the same point, September 30th in 2019. So we're nearly a third off in terms of room demand. It's actually a steeper drop off when you look at room revenue for hotel and motel and other commercial lodging establishments. We're 42% below where we were at the same point in 2019. Incidentally, Airbnbs, home sharing, vacation rental type properties are actually up by 20% compared to 2019 at this same point. That really shouldn't come as much of a surprise because when you think about the people who have been willing to take leisure travel, have been willing to push forward with a family trip, hotels and motels are still perceived by a lot of travelers as being less safe than renting an entire home where you and your family or your friends can hole up. Remember, a hotel and motel, of course, you're interacting with strangers outside of your household. The perception is a home rental is going to be more secure and more safe, especially in the face of something like a pandemic. And so it's really not a big surprise to see whereas commercial lodging establishments are doing a lot worse than they did in 19, private home rentals have actually been doing significantly better. Lastly, in terms of what we've seen in business recruitment, early on, first few weeks of the pandemic, we were carrying about 200 active projects, so 200 deals, business recruitment situations, in situations where an existing employer was looking to expand in North Carolina, 200 of those deals pretty much in about 3 or 4 weeks dropped off to 150 active projects. Most of those 4 dozen deals that exited our pipeline basically said, look, COVID-19 is such a disruptor to our plans. We're not even sure we can proceed with this job creation and capital investment plan. We don't know if we need this new production facility. We're just going to table those plans, or in some cases, we're just canceling that project altogether. And so that's why we saw the pipeline drop off so quickly. The deals that were still left in the pipeline, of course, were also affected. Now, those companies were still planning to move forward with their investment plans. The challenge was they were not able to move forward at the same pace that they normally do. Real estate is a big part of the equation, right? When we're trying to attract companies to North Carolina, they usually need a site to build on or a building to move into. Doesn't matter if they're office or industrial, they're going to have a real estate need. And as all of you know, those real estate decisions are not really something that anyone wants to make virtually when they're spending tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars on a new headquarters, a new manufacturing plant. I'm still amazed that people buy homes sight unseen. It's nothing I would ever do, but I know in some markets that happens. I don't think that ever happens when it comes to industrial and office deals. This is very much a process of due diligence that requires in-person evaluation of the real estate, of the community, of the state and local government officials to gauge how pro-business a particular place is. Without the ability to travel and go do that in-person due diligence, of course, that would slow down the process that these companies would work through to eventually reach their site selection decision. And we certainly saw that through early summer. Now, in terms of new client activity, new deals coming in through the door, it's been a tale of 2 quarters. March, April, May, you look at the number of new deals coming into us in each of those months, and you compare it to those same months in 2019, anywhere from 20 to 30% lower new client activity in those 3 months. Since June, so June, July, August, and now September, we've actually been averaging anywhere from 10 to 20% greater new deal activity than those same months in 2019. Now, is some of that companies in March, April, and May who just postponed the launch of their site search? That's entirely possible. It could also be some companies that recognize that while it's certainly not a piece of cake, they can plan around COVID-19. They believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and they can still push forward with their capital investment expansions. Whatever that reason is, we've seen a much busier June, July, August, and September than we did even a year ago. And of course, beginning back this summer, as travel restrictions started to loosen, we have seen more and more companies resume due diligence on those active projects in our pipeline. And so that's been good to get that activity back and going. What are we doing? Let me jump through some of this really quickly and then get to the trends and then have time for questions. Existing industry. Some of the things that we've done are, of course, early on, we tried to put together as many information resources, really became a clearinghouse of credible information on financial programs, on relief resources for those existing employers that we are regularly in touch with. And I think that's a big part of what economic development organizations have to do in something like the COVID-19 situation. These companies are great at running their businesses. When it comes time to tapping into external resources that can help them to grow or to get through troubled times, that's not something they spend a lot of their time on. And so it falls to us as economic development groups to get that information together and get it into the hands of the businesses who can act on that. We, of course, like I said, have been helping companies navigate a lot of these federal relief resources, as well as some of the state and local funding programs designed to help companies weather this situation. You talk about tourism. We suspended for pretty much a good chunk of all of spring and a good part of summer. We suspended any of our marketing on the tourism front. It makes no sense to advertise North Carolina as a travel destination when people are unwilling or unable to travel. And so we're just keeping our powder dry for when people begin to dip their toes back into the travel experience, which, like I said, we started seeing a lot more of that after the Memorial Day weekend. We've launched this Count on Me North Carolina initiative. That's a partnership between our tourism team, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and the North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association. Think of it as a seal of approval for small businesses that have gone through training around health and hygiene and safety practices, not only for their employees, but for the customers who patronize their establishments. That's a mark that gives the customer some assurance that that business is following the best possible protocols. It's a way for us to get people back into many of these small businesses that make up our tourism economy. Business recruitment, of course, we've continued to circle back with some of those companies that told us that they were postponing their projects when the pandemic first came on. And even though a lot have still stayed on the sidelines, happy to report that a modest number of those companies that postponed their plans back in the springtime have come back or told us that, look, they're ready to move forward again now with the project that they had been discussing with us before COVID. And so that's reassuring as well. Like I said, we've been safely accommodating more of that client due diligence field work since the start of the summer. And that's a good sign to see that companies are now pushing forward with those decision-making processes. I'll close here with a few trends on sort of what life was like in different facets of our mission before COVID and what we think it's starting to look like after COVID. I'll start with existing industry. I can assure you, we have that existing industry team, which is based around North Carolina. Their typical day involves calling on an existing employer, often manufacturing, not always, but often manufacturing, and sitting in with a plant manager or a site lead or a company president, and just trying to understand, what are your biggest pain points? What are the issues that are affecting your ability to keep growing in North Carolina? Because of course, that's what we want to see. And before the pandemic, the number one issue in all of those conversations anywhere in the state was around workforce. Companies were really struggling in a 3.5% unemployment rate environment to find, hire, or retain the type of skilled workers that they needed for their respective industries. Like I said, a lot of our conversations are with manufacturers, but we know that workforce was also a challenge in sectors like healthcare and construction. For our manufacturers, even getting enough qualified applicants to hire from could be a challenge, and that was kind of a big issue. At the same time, in our conversations with manufacturers around the state, we know how many of them were dependent on a global supplier network. Again, this is a global economy, and so many of our bigger manufacturers had parts or supplies that were coming them from somewhere overseas. Fast forward to these post or mid-COVID days, and for many of our companies, access to financial relief quickly in March and April displaced the need for workforce. Again, for some of these companies, it was simply about getting through an environment where demand quickly dried up or softened in their respective sectors. Workforce readiness, everything from companies that were worried about whether they could get workers to come back, if those workers were receiving both federal and state unemployment benefits that were actually more than the wages they earned at the workplace. And by the way, you don't have to put yourself at risk by leaving home and going to a workplace. That was something that we certainly heard from some of our manufacturing clients. But also just workforce continues to be an issue. Like I said, we've seen a number of sectors actually have to ramp up hiring because demand during the pandemic has actually been greater than before the pandemic. Food and beverage, life science companies being a couple of those examples. And the challenge of finding skilled, qualified applicants is as acute as it was before the pandemic, which intuitively you would think that now that unemployment is actually closer to 8% in North Carolina, you would think it would actually be a little easier. The reality is we still have this persistent skills gap that's affecting the ability of some of our existing industries to keep growing in North Carolina. And of course, many companies that have relied on a global network of suppliers, seeing the disruption that the pandemic caused to those global supply chains, I think many of them are rethinking how close they want to be able to procure some of those key materials and supplies from. Is that going to mean they start bringing stuff from Mexico and Canada instead of from China? Is it going to mean they actually want more of their suppliers in the US or even close to them in North Carolina? That remains to be seen, but that's certainly some opportunity for us if they want to bring that supply chain activity much closer to where they are in North Carolina. On the tourism front, before coronavirus, 2019 was a record year for us in terms of visitor spending, nearly $27 billion of visitor spending, again, on lodging establishments, on restaurants, on tourism attractions, supporting 230,000 people in our travel, tourism, leisure, hospitality sectors. 2019's record year followed record years in 18 and 17 as well. And so we were on a really good run of visitor spending, which is probably the best measurement for our tourism economy. We were at the same time marketing North Carolina to domestic visitors. We were expanding our reach into international audiences. As I said earlier, we have representatives in the UK, Canada, and Germany who are reaching out to travel writers, tour operators, and travel agents, trying to get North Carolina on the list of destinations for when people visit the US from overseas. But in recent years, we've been pushing those efforts into markets like China, France, and the Scandinavian countries. The reason we continue to want to grow our international visitor audience is because when international visitors come to the US, yes, the first time they're going to visit the Disneys, the New York Cities, the San Franciscos, but on the second or third visit where they're seeking out a more authentic American travel experience, the American South and places like North Carolina with a lot of natural beauty, those are going to be high on the list for would-be travelers. And so if we can get them to come detour into North Carolina, they're not taking day trips or weekend visits. They're international. They're coming from a lot farther away, which means they're spending more time and spending more money. That's why we have continued, at least before coronavirus, to market North Carolina aggressively for tourism to overseas audiences. And then in 2019, our tourism marketing team actually won the sort of the best honor you can win in the tourism industry. It was an award for our marketing campaign called First That Last. This was a campaign emphasizing all the novel new experiences you could have when you visited North Carolina. So that was life before COVID. After March, one, it's going to be a lengthy recovery for our tourism sector. More than half of the jobs losses and unemployment that's happened in North Carolina since March has been within the tourism, leisure, and hospitality sectors. Again, restaurants, hotels, a lot of these places that just simply have no demand or much lower demand because people are not traveling anywhere near the levels they normally would. So it's going to be a lengthy recovery. In the meanwhile, it's going to be a while until we market North Carolina to international tourists, if only because as an international visitor, it's really hard to get into the US right now. I'm not even sure if it's possible, just like I'm not even sure if I, as an American, am able to go visit a lot of countries around the world. And until the pandemic gets better, it's hard to imagine people are going to be able to get into the US. And in some cases, they may look at our case rates and our infections and they may say, you know what, I'm actually not going to visit the US. So it doesn't make sense for us to target our audience. The folks we are going to target with our marketing in the near term, it's going to be drive distance states. It's going to be getting North Carolinians to explore more of their backyard. We can get someone in Charlotte to visit the Outer Banks or someone in Raleigh to visit Asheville. That's pumping some much needed revenue into these small businesses in our tourism economy. Like I said, that's a different tack than we normally take, where we focus on people outside North Carolina, but these are really unprecedented times. And even though our award-winning campaign last year was around novel new experiences that you could have visiting North Carolina, novel and new is not really what travelers want based on the research that we've been commissioning every week since the pandemic. What travelers want, whether they've started traveling already or whether they're starting to think about traveling again, what they want is safety, comfort, and familiarity. That really has to be the tone of whatever messaging we put out there to market North Carolina for tourism. It's not going to be novel and new and exotic. It's going to be safe, familiar, comfortable. On business recruitment, I'll close here and then we'll go to questions. Again, hard to say a record year, but it was certainly a high watermark for us in 2019 as a result of business recruitment projects. 21,600 new jobs were announced. Last year is a great year by any measure for our team on that count. Again, it is a team effort. We work a lot with partners all across the state, but 21,600 was a great year, certainly our best year in our 6-year history. We had a strong pipeline coming into 2020. Like I said, 200 active projects. A lot of our office deals have long been looking at metro areas, the Triangle, Charlotte, even the Triad, looking at those metro markets because that's where they believe the talent is for their operations. But even within those metro areas, our office business recruitment projects were really increasingly focused on the center cities within those regions, the urban centers. Think the Innovation Quarter in Winston-Salem, or Uptown or South End in Charlotte, or the American Tobacco Campus in Durham, or the Warehouse District in Raleigh. Those types of dense urban environments were really where a lot of these office employers, headquarters, technology firms, that's where they were really gravitating towards, because many of them thought if we locate in that kind of dense urban center, we can have a better experience attracting millennial talent, younger workers who want to live, work, and play all within that vibrant city center environment. That's what the world looked like in business recruitment before the pandemic. What do we think things are headed for? Well, one, our sales pipeline, like I said, dropped off sharply in March and April. We're finally back as of this month to levels we saw before the pandemic. So again, we're sitting on about 190 active deals at this particular moment. Some sectors are doing better than others. We are our leading sectors right now for deals are, as I said, food and beverage and life sciences. Those are the top two industry categories if you look at our pipeline of projects. Whereas companies in aerospace, for example, we normally have quite a few aerospace manufacturing projects. Well, that's actually sitting at kind of a low point right now because you can imagine people aren't flying. I think air travel is still 70% below where it normally would be, which means downstream demand for new aircraft and all the parts that go into new aircraft and all the manufacturing to produce those parts, that has slowed down or gone away. And so we're seeing much fewer aerospace projects than we normally would. We have one that's hopefully close to announcing in the very near future, and that one is proceeding forward because of some other reasons. But after that one, it could be a while till we see some big projects to compete for in aerospace. Meanwhile, this whole focus on urban centers that we've seen a lot of our office employers express a preference for, I don't know that that's going to continue being the case. You think about dense urban centers that require public transportation to access the workplace. That's precisely the kind of environment where pandemics tend to thrive the most, because you're talking about cramming lots of people into a very small footprint. Are more companies that do office projects, are they going to be looking more at suburban locations, a Ballantyne instead of a South End, a Research Triangle Park instead of a downtown Durham? It's really hard to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if, as we see more office site selection projects, if we begin to see more of those companies express a preference for those types of suburban markets. I don't think they get away from the metro regions. I just think where in the metro regions they look is going to be a little different than what we've seen in recent years. Add to that the increase of virtual work or telecommuting, and that really could start to change business recruitment on the office front in ways that we have never seen, at least not in my 20-some years doing this work. And then lastly, what matters most to companies? What you see on the right-hand side, that's a survey of corporate executives and business owners. It's done every year by an industry publication. And it basically asks these executives to rank order 30 different factors that are most important when they decide where to locate a new investment. And you can see issues like highway access, skilled labor availability, cost of labor. Those dominated the survey results for 2019, which were released in March. When we get ready to see the 2020 results in next March, it's going to be really interesting to see how COVID-19 weaves its way into these location preferences. There may be a factor that's added to the list that we've never seen, which is public health. Or just ability to respond to a pandemic, things like that employers need to be aware of and cognizant of when they choose a new location. That could start to show up in terms of general location preferences. And so again, these are all trends that we're keeping an eye on in our work. So with that, I think I went a couple minutes over the 35 minutes I planned, but I'm happy to use the balance of these 20 minutes to answer questions that the audience may have. And again, really appreciate being with you all this afternoon.
Well, thank you as always, Christopher. I took a bunch of notes, and I got a couple text questions. And then we just had another one pop up, so I'll go to the chat first. What have you seen regarding international business relocation in North Carolina during 19? Did that business relocation pause in a similar manner as domestic business relocation did?
Yeah,
kind of touched on that.
Great question. Let me, I'm going to see if I can pull up, we don't do this for everyone, but the North Carolina Realtors is one of our major investors, who is the group that we share this with. So you all get to benefit from the North Carolina Realtors and their investment in our organization. So I'm going to pull up our Salesforce dashboard here to answer that question. You won't see anything proprietary in here, so don't worry about that. But you will see sort of a real-time look at our pipeline. So as you can see, we're sitting on, let's see, last refresh. As of this afternoon, we're sitting at 188 active projects, recruitment and expansion deals, representing 42,000 new jobs, 9.2 billion capital investment. That's if we win all 188 of those deals. Try as we may, we're not going to win all 188, but that gives you a sense of the size of the universe we're competing for. I'm going to scroll down here to answer this first question. Let's see here. So foreign direct investment. So of those expansion projects and those recruitment projects, what percentage of them involve a foreign parent company? And remember, we don't always know who the company is. About half the time, we're actually dealing with a third-party intermediary, a site selection consultant, a national brokerage, an attorney, a law firm, boutique consultancy. We may not know who it is initially, but when we do know who it is, of course, we want to determine, is it a US company or a foreign company, just for our own tracking purposes. So you can see, let me pull up the right one. So in terms of number of projects, so this kind of Tiffany blue color here, 20% of our projects today are involving foreign parent companies. Normally, we had been actually running at close to a third of our total projects, recruitment and expansion, involving foreign parent companies, at least in 17, 18, and 19. So we're down to around 20% right now. Now, is that related to COVID? Hard to say, but I wouldn't be surprised if that has something to do with it. So to answer the questioner, yes, we are actually seeing lower amounts of foreign direct investment project activity than we normally would expect. And I wouldn't be surprised if COVID is baked into some of that change.
All right. Thank you for that one. Now, what are some of the most exciting or unexpected, if you will, future economic trends that you think are coming, i.e. business entities or industries that are starting to converge upon our state and region?
Well, I think North Carolina is going to be well positioned for any growth that happens in call it the biotech or life sciences sector. Again, a pandemic has definitely made all of us aware of the importance of, good health care, but also therapies, cures, vaccines, all of these things that can hopefully get us past this pandemic and, God forbid, whatever the next pandemic is. And North Carolina already boasts a very strong sector in life sciences, biotech, and pharmaceutical. And so I think all of these weapons at humanity's disposal for dealing with a public health crisis, a lot of that industry is already here in North Carolina. And so with a renewed focus on that and more investment, I think North Carolina is going to be well situated there. Food and beverage, I talked about it. As less of us go out to eat, I've become sort of our home chef, which I would have found a laughable concept 8 months ago, but I've been doing all the cooking pretty much since then. There's a lot more of that that's where demand for food and beverage has shifted, is to buying it for ourselves and preparing it at home. North Carolina is a big agriculture state. And so if we can use our agricultural history to attract more of the food processing facilities, that's also going to be a sector of opportunity for us. And then, of course, as more people depend on technology to telecommute or virtually work, or as companies automate facilities to get the human portion out of the equation, we've got a very robust technology sector in North Carolina that's also hopefully well poised for more investment. So I don't think it's all that different from what's gotten us to where we are. I just think it's what the pandemic has done that's going to drive greater emphasis on some of these sectors that were already strong suits for North Carolina.
Excellent. Thank you. And we had a bunch more questions pop up in chat, so let me go hit a few of those. All right, first one. What specific skill sets are needed and who is best positioned to supply this training?
Training for whom? I'm not sure I understood that question.
I'm going to guess for the new industries that you were talking about.
Well, sure. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that one of our biggest partners when it comes to solving the workforce dilemma that companies are facing, again, these are existing employers as well as companies we're trying to recruit, are the community colleges. North Carolina is home to 58 community colleges. Anywhere in the state, you're no greater than 30 minutes from one of those community colleges. Community colleges are absolutely, they do a lot of great things. Of course, they provide people 2-year degrees. They provide people education for their first 2 years of college, after which they go on to a traditional 4-year university. But they are absolutely pivotal to doing training for industry, technology, manufacturing, healthcare professions. Those community colleges are absolutely key. And so we always bring them to the table when we're dealing with companies that are looking at workforce challenges. So I would say as a state, we need to continue supporting our community colleges because they are the biggest tool in our arsenal on the workforce issue.
All right, thank you. And I've got 2 more questions I think we have time for. I'm watching our time. Let's see, Bill says, I'm representing a restaurant owner who is looking to sell their business. Any recommendations on who to connect with in the restaurant business or asset purchases?
Ooh, good question. So we don't get into business brokerage. That's above our pay grade, and that's a really specialized line of work. Of course, there's web portals where you can advertise a business that's for sale. I'm sure the person asking this question is well aware of those. I forget the name of the most common one, but I would say maybe if the restaurant owner hasn't developed a relationship with the Restaurant and Lodging Association, that's the biggest trade association here in North Carolina for people in that space. Again, North Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association, that may be a network to look into to find someone who's interested in making that potentially an acquisition or a partnership or something like that. And Lynn Minges, she's the director of that association. We work a lot with her. I would say either her or someone on her staff may be able to help your client figure out how can I get this asset into the hands of someone who has a plan for it.
Bill, let us know after the meeting. We can connect you if you need to. Isabel works over there, though. So
oh, that's right.
You may
Yeah, she
already have
does.
contact info. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. She does. Yeah.
Small world.
It is.
Somewhat,
It is a small world.
world. All right. And last question, and a perfect one to end on. How can we as realtors engage more and better in this process?
So like I said, real estate is absolutely key. Any of the deals that we work on, especially business recruitment projects where the company is new to North Carolina, there is a real estate component. Sometimes those companies are asking us to identify the real estate and the locations around the state that work for them. That's usually more the manufacturing projects. The office projects are usually represented by the Newmarks, the CBREs, the JLLs, or in some cases more of a regional player. But either way, there's a real estate component to this. So I think there's a couple of things that you as real estate professionals can do. One, never hesitate to reach out to your local economic development organization. These are oftentimes 1 or 2 person shops. They have to do a lot of different things, and they're generalists, just like we are at the state level. But I think any advice you can give to them on real estate or help them to identify real estate in the community that could be suitable for an industrial or office user, that's certainly something, assistance, I'm sure they would welcome. Again, you all are experts at real estate, whereas in economic development, suffice it to say, I'm not sure we're experts in anything other than the very general nature of what we do, which includes pieces of the real estate profession. I'd say the other thing that you can do, whether you're in real estate or not, is you guys are all ambassadors for the communities and for North Carolina. Again, there's a lot of different ways companies may find out about why North Carolina is a great place to do business. It's not realistic to expect that it's just going to be our messaging and our marketing efforts. Relationships matter. What you all as North Carolina residents and business people say also matters, because you might influence someone who's thinking about where they're going to grow his or her business. And maybe North Carolina is an attractive choice that they would have never known about had they not heard about that from you. So as I always say to audiences like this, we deputize you all to be spokespeople for why North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and do business. And I think that's something hopefully you would want to do just as a resident and citizen of this state.
Well, absolutely. And thank you for your time today, Christopher. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody enjoyed this session. It's going to be sent out and posted on the website. Thanks to all, and everybody have a good rest of your week.
Thanks.